Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Russell Davies. I'm the Church Council Secretary at Rondebosch United Church, for those of you who don't know me, but I'm joined today by two of our members, Dr. Rudzani Maloya and Dr. David Harrison, who I think are known to most of you. So welcome, Rudzani and David. Thanks for making the time to join us today. I know you're both very, very busy people. So the reason for our conversation today is really just to try and draw on your collective wisdom and expertise to maybe provide some information to people within the church and the broader church community about the status of the virus, where you think we're at, and also to talk about the various vaccine options and to, I guess, encourage people to take up that opportunity where that's possible for them. So we're very fortunate to have two people who are right in the thick of the action in terms of this whole issue. And so, yeah, welcome. So firstly, Rudzani, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about where you are located within this whole issue at the moment. I should point out that both David and Rudzani are medical doctors, so they come with that training, but I think their current involvement is much more specialist than that and really relevant to this discussion today. So yeah, welcome, Rudzani. Perhaps tell us a little bit about what you're involved with just at the moment.
Thanks, Russell, and thanks for putting this together and for this conversation. So, as Russell mentioned, I'm a clinician. I'm a doctor. Currently, my role here in Cape Town is as the head of pediatrics and child health at the University of Cape Town. And the Red Cross War Memorial Children's Hospital. But I'm also involved as a researcher in an entity called the Vaccines for Africa Initiative, which is in the Department of Public Health in the University of Cape Town. But my other role is that I serve as a member of the National Advisory Group for Immunization, which we call NAGI, which is a technical advisory group for the Minister of Health in terms of vaccination. And recently, since the beginning of vaccination against COVID, I've been serving in a working group called the Workstream 1 for the Ministerial Advisory Committee for COVID vaccines that specifically looks at the effectiveness and efficacy of the vaccines we're using, as well as any kind of adverse events that one would need to worry about. Thanks, Russell.
Okay, thanks, Rudzani. And David, I mean, David's day job is as the CEO of the DG Murray Trust, but he has been seconded into another responsibility just recently. So David, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about that. Thanks,
Russell. Yeah, so I'm coordinating the donor support to the Department of Health for the vaccine rollout. And I'm also seconded into the department for 6 months to try and provide strategic support to some of the key elements of the vaccination rollout. I'm not on the bridge, I'm more in the engine room. Occasionally I feel like I'm in the water trying to hold the rudder straight, but it's obviously is a massive undertaking, and we're trying to do our bit just to make sure that some of the key aspects that should be in place are protected in the face of a lot of political and other influences, and in the face of a lot of uncertainty, but trying to ensure that the program does roll out.
Thanks, David. So can we start with you, Rudzani? And I should just say that I'm going to sort of kick off with some questions, but we are hoping to set up some dialogue between Rudzani and David. It'll be a more free-flowing conversation as we go along. But Rudzani, perhaps you can kick off by telling us, what's your take on where we are at with the spread of the virus? There's obviously a lot of publicity that we're in a third wave, but I'd be interested to hear your perspective on where you think the country's at the moment.
Yes, I mean, it's quite obvious if anyone has been listening to the news, especially as far as how things are concerned, that we are in the midst of a new surge following the one that we had end of last year, beginning of this year. But this was to be expected in many ways because once the virus is spreading within the community, one expects it, unless it's checked by another intervention, to keep on changing. And all these changes especially when they start now overlapping with the winter season, which is known to be a really good period for transmitting. We were kind of anticipating this third wave from the beginning of the year. And one of the reasons is what we're talking about today in terms of vaccines and so forth, because without those vaccines having been accessible to the majority of people in the country, one would have expected this to happen, because for all practical purposes, there's little to check the virus apart from it just dying away, dying out by itself. So this was kind of what is anticipated. And again, if conditions don't change meaningfully, one could even expect another wave, down the road. And the severity of what we are seeing in Gauteng, which is higher than previously, was also anticipated if it was being caused by a slightly different variant that would behave slightly different from the previous ones as well. So that's probably where we are right now. And I think it's the data shows very clearly that we are in the midst of another wave, so to say.
Okay, thank you. And David, what's your take on where we are in terms of the vaccine rollout?
So, Russell, I think it's useful for us just to stop and say, what are we trying to do with the vaccination rollout? And we're trying to do two things. One is we're trying to very rapidly reduce death and severe disease that leads to hospitalization. That is our first task. And then our second task is to try and achieve what's called herd immunity. So let me just deal with both of those. We know that that people who are dying, who are getting sick and dying, might be anybody. It might be a 20-year-old or it might be an 80-year-old, but the risk is far, far higher in older people. And when we look at the people who are dying, far, far more older people are being hospitalized and dying. So we've got to start by vaccinating the oldest people first and moving down as quickly as possible. That's the first task. The second task is to
David,
move out.
I was just going to interrupt and say the first priority group were healthcare workers, as I understand, and then moving to old people.
Yeah. So again, if we were to say, look, we want to reduce hospitalization firstly, then we would have started with 90-year-olds, 100-year-olds, 90-year-olds, and 80-year-olds. Obviously, the view was that we have to protect our health workers, because, as I say, even if you're 40 and you're a health worker, we know that a significant number of health workers have died. So you're absolutely right. In the first phase, we wanted to vaccinate healthcare workers. We vaccinated about 500,000 healthcare workers, and now in moving to the general population, have focused on the elderly first, and are now moving down to people over 50 are allowed to register and will soon be able to be vaccinated. The other goal is to try and cross this elusive threshold of perhaps 2/3 of the population, or even more, that if we can get over that threshold, we can move into a zone where the virus battles to find somebody to infect, because there are more people that are immune than are not immune, and so we're trying to get to the goal of about 2/3 of our total population, which equates to the entire adult population in South Africa. 2/3 of people in South Africa are over 18. We have to try and get to those levels, or very, very close to it, to contain the virus and hopefully achieve herd immunity. So where are we now? We need to get to 67%. At the moment, we're at about 5% of the population have been vaccinated. So that's roughly about just over 3 million people have been vaccinated today. We were slow off the mark. We know that we had some curveballs coming our way with AstraZeneca and decisions made by government not to proceed with that. Then there was a delay in another batch of vaccines coming in from Johnson & Johnson. All of this has held us back. We're not the only country that's experienced that, but certainly we've been held back. We're at a point now where about 5 million vaccines will be coming in during the course of July, which will get us to about 8 million by the end of July. the problem is that everybody across the world is looking for vaccines. And so government only really has line of sight of about the next month, while it's entered into contracts for 40 million vaccines doses by the end of the year. We really can only guarantee what the next month is going to look like. So we should be roughly at 20% of the population by the end of July, if we can ramp up and roll out quickly, and hopefully be able to scale from there. Just my final comment on this, Russell, is that what we're seeing inevitably is that people with medical aids are lining up first, and we're seeing that roughly at the moment, proportionate to the size of the population, for every 2 people on medical aid who are being vaccinated, it's only 1 uninsured person. And this is an inequity. It's going to result in all of us failing because we won't achieve the herd immunity, we won't achieve the levels of coverage. And so we have to find some way to ensure that everybody has equal access to vaccination in South Africa, even if you're not a South African citizen. Even if you're a foreign national in South Africa, we need you to get vaccinated.
Okay. And just jumping in because of the thing you mentioned, Russell, earlier on when you pointed out at healthcare workers being vaccinated. One of the reasons is that we needed to protect the healthcare system, because just because there's COVID does not stop other people from other illnesses and other problems and other issues to getting ill. As what you may be hearing about Gauteng right now, the real big impact of the current COVID wave is actually hitting non-COVID related services, because if you've got more people sick with COVID, it means you clog the whole healthcare system and you prevent people with chronic illnesses or other new acute issues being looked after in the hospitals. So you protected first healthcare workers so that they're actually around to be able to care. But by what David was talking about, when you prevent people from getting sick with COVID, not only do you protect against COVID deaths and complications, you protect the whole healthcare system. So we should see this much more broadly than just about COVID. It's about the whole healthcare system for everyone, which is what David is talking about equitable access to health, to COVID vaccines. It's actually a very important issue, because more than 85% of the population get looked after in the public sector. And if we can't protect that part of the healthcare system, we basically sit here with the risk of the healthcare system collapsing, and not just about COVID, but about everyone else.
And obviously that's one of the main drivers behind the decision to ban alcohol sales for a period, because of the impact on accident and emergency cases, which further clogs the system when it's already under strain. Can I ask both of you, I mean, one of the issues emerging is the different strains and variants of the virus, and how is that complicating things in terms of the spread? Do vaccines work equally efficiently against the different variants? Can you perhaps speak about that a little bit more? Because, that's what's, I think, causing people a lot of fear at the moment.
I think I mentioned this earlier on. As long as you've got a virus that is running rampage out there and replicating, that replication underlies chances of changing and mutation. That's what viruses do if they're unchecked, which is why the sooner you can vaccinate, the better. But because it has been now going on for this long period of time, we've seen variants emerging that are slightly different from what we may have had when we had the first case, was it March or so last year, and in this country. But all over the world, we've seen the emergence of these. Now, what we now know with respect to the current vaccines is that they may have very different efficacy against different variants. But by and large, what we have right now, the 2 vaccines that are available currently in the country, both the Johnson & Johnson and the Pfizer that are available through the state right now, they seem to be effective against the current strain that is driving the variant, the current variant that is driving the third wave, which is the so-called Delta variant. They seem to be effective. The data from the laboratory shows the same effectiveness. But I think what has always been very important to note from the outset is that when you ask about how effective the vaccine is, you have to ask against what. So is because remember, the virus can infect someone and they may not have any symptoms, or they may have very mild symptoms, a runny nose, maybe sometimes a bit of fever and a headache, but may not land up in hospital. Invariably, the vaccines that we've had so far seems to suggest, even the time when the AstraZeneca did not seem to be so effective against that beta variant we have, that there's a very good chance that it will still work as well against severe disease, which means we'll be able to keep people out of hospitals and certainly death with whatever vaccine that we've so far registered in this country. So I think that's an important thing. And as what we mentioned already, that is at the level where we can make the largest impact to protect people's lives and health, as well as the healthcare system. So, and that is the major thing that we're trying to do. Then, as Dave pointed out, the second part of herd immunity is something else that maybe we need to worry about in the long run, is what we do with the current vaccines or whether we need tweaking of the vaccines. But certainly, if you receive that vaccine, whatever variant we have right now, the evidence shows that it will protect against the severe forms of disease.
I think what Rizani is speaking about has been demonstrated very well in countries like the United Kingdom, where no vaccine is 100% effective in stopping transmission. You do get a small proportion of breakthrough infections. In fact, in South Africa, among the 500,000 health workers who were vaccinated, about 3,000 of them had a breakthrough infection. So it doesn't stop transmission entirely. It significantly reduces transmission. But what we have seen is a dramatic effect on people getting sick and dying. So if you have a look at the figures in the United Kingdom, while they're in the middle of a third wave, just because it is such an infectious a virus, the number of deaths is just really insignificant compared to what we're seeing across other countries. And so I think for every person listening and watching this and thinking, should they get vaccinated or not, there are really two questions that need to be asked. Firstly is do I want to protect myself and ensure that I don't get ill or end up in hospital or even die. But more importantly, what role do I want to do in contributing to ensuring that my family, my children, my spouse, my mother, my father are kept safe, and in that process build the type of immunity out that ultimately will be protective for us all.
To just add the last point that Dave has just made now, there is emerging data that transmission within households in which other members got a vaccine compared to those in which other households did not get the vaccine was very different, with more members of those who, some of their members had received vaccines, being more protected from contracting the virus than otherwise. So it's really key. We do know that there's escape in terms of getting infection, even if you are not very severely ill, but it does start indicating and showing some evidence that it does go beyond just protecting yourself and protecting other family members.
Yes, I mean, when people are talking about effectiveness, I was thinking there's almost three aspects to that. One is the likelihood of being infected yourself, two, the severity of symptoms, and third is your infectiousness or contagiousness, your likelihood of passing it on to others. And am I right in saying that it is impactful in all three of those issues?
That's right. In all three of those, your likelihood of infecting other people, the likelihood of getting infected yourself, and the severity of disease are all significantly reduced by this vaccine. An issue is, and we know that we've heard it a lot, about the risks of the vaccine, and I'm sure Rizani will speak to this, but what we can say is that the vaccine is thousands of times safer than getting COVID, thousands of times safer, and we mustn't lose that fact, even as we hear that there are occasional complications from COVID. When we're talking about 300 people dying a day in South Africa at the moment from COVID, and we talk about the protective effect, we could be saving literally thousands of lives every week if we had a full vaccination program in place already.
Okay, thanks, David. So, I mean, I think you raise an interesting point, because we know that there is, there are various, some would say, conspiracy theories out there about, the risks of being vaccinated, and, people will quote different, perhaps minority medical opinion to say that there are risks and dangers with that. I just would like to give you both an opportunity to respond to those, for those, who are listening, who might have been feeling apprehensive about, the risks or the consequences of being vaccinated.
If what we need to do is to be honest about things like side effects, virtually everything one has as a form of treatment in one form or another has got some degree of side effects. We just don't think much about it because we're balancing the benefits versus whatever side effects. So, for example, people think that if you've got a headache, you can just pop Panadol until someone tells you that they've seen a child or an adult who had liver failure due to Panadol. But the fact that that happens very rarely does not stop people from using Panadol every day if they've got pain or a headache. Now, when it comes to vaccines, what is interesting is the rigors involved in making sure that these things are safe goes higher than even that of other drugs. And there are many reasons for doing that. And the threshold has, during any phase of the vaccine rollout or even of the trial, the threshold for stopping when there are safety signals been quite high. You would probably have heard last week with people marching to SAPRA offices demanding certain vaccines to be introduced. The reason why they have not been yet registered is exactly because of the rigor that is required in making sure that they are actually very safe before they are actually used and registered for use by our population. Think about it. I mean, David just mentioned earlier on that we as a country are under immense pressure to have the right number of doses. That's where the bottleneck is. The main reason why we are not rolling out quicker than we are right now is just because we've got limited access to the doses that we require. Then why would we, having that kind of pressure, not just let anything come through and just use it because we are desperate? But the reason is you have to balance out that safety, those safety aspects. So all the vaccines that we have that are registered now and are being used have really gone through serious scrutiny with a lot of data. And we are probably the only positive thing right now of us not having had these vaccines earlier on is that by the time we're receiving them, they've been used by millions of people all over the world. And although there are side effects reported, and a lot of those side effects reported are actually just local things. If I'm going to inject you, you will have pain, and part of that is reported as side effects. Sometimes you may have a bit of swelling or redness, but generally that is indication that your body is actually responding to produce their antibodies, and that comes with those reactions. So the side effects that are mainly reported are what you call mild side effects. They're the same side effects children get every day when we take our children for their normal immunization schedules. That is basically what you get. Now and then you may have reports of other things that happened, like they've been talking about allergic reactions and so forth. And they have been reported, they are there, but they are very, very rare, happening once in a number of millions of doses that have been administered. So, and I think it's important for all of us to keep vigilant with respect to that. But so far, given that there are more than there are actually, how many people? I think there's up to 3 billion people vaccinated in the world right now with doses given all over the world of these COVID vaccines. And we are not hearing about mass deaths or severe injury occurring all over the world. So in many ways, I can say that I'm quite confident of basically first our systems within this country of doing due diligence before every vaccine is given, and then due diligence in terms of monitoring side effects that may send sufficient signals for us to consider whether there's something to worry about. I don't know if that answers your question, Russell.
Thank you, Razani. David, anything to add?
Just to remind everybody of how vaccines work. And normally what happens is if a live virus, a live coronavirus gets into gets into your body starts to mount a response. It starts, the special white blood cells that start to rush in to try and gobble it up. It then sort of eventually develops an antibody response. It develops cells in your body that memorize the virus, so that next time it comes, your body quickly kicks in and mounts the same sort of immune response. That happens that's what happens with infection. But with the vaccine, you're actually not using a live virus. You're using just a little piece of there's nothing live about it. It's dead, or it's only a little piece of the genetic code that you're using to stimulate exactly that same response without your being exposed to the virus. And as Rodzania said, this has been done in child vaccination for years and years and years. What's new here is that Pfizer and Moderna are using part of the genetic code that then programs for the antigen. It's part of the same production pipeline. It just happens to be a little bit further back than the ingredients that we've used in the past. But it has been checked. It's to ensure that it is safe. It is neutralized. It is not live. It is dead. It's everything that we want to ensure safety, to enable your body to respond without putting you at risk.
Can I just use an example that I gave early in the week when I was talking to another group of teachers who wanted us to talk about the vaccines and to just ask questions about this thing? It's to just use another explanation for what David is talking about. Your immune system is given sort of target practice, so that when the real virus comes in, it can actually identify it and it will know how to fight it. The new vaccines that we're using with the Pfizer one, the so-called messenger RNA, is that instead of giving the body an already ready-made part of the virus, not the real full virus as target practice, the body is given a recipe of how to make the target itself before it learns how to fight it. And because that is all that's happening. It's not like your DNA or anything, because I'm just raising that, Russell, because there have been concerns about whether it will change someone's DNA or whatever else it is. The way our body works, with whatever it produces, our body can produce saliva, it can produce gastric juices. And the way to do so is that your own DNA makes a recipe from the DNA and tells the cell on how to make that stomach juice or that saliva. Now, these new technologies allow the body to make the target practice itself. So you're not even giving it a virus. You're basically giving it that part which we call it the spike protein on the coronavirus, because that is the area that gives the body practice targets for how to fight the virus when it comes in. So the vaccine is that recipe, and the body makes it the target itself, learns to fight it, and now is prepared for that for the real virus when it confronts it.
Okay, so that leads me to another question. I mean, could one argue that the best vaccination is a previous dose of COVID? I think one of the questions that comes up for many people is, if I've had COVID previously, am I still at risk of getting it again? And do I need to be vaccinated? If I've already had COVID and I'm vaccinated, am I almost 100% safe? I'd be interested to hear your take on that.
Two things, I think, and they're important because they relate to what we now know and what we now understand about coronaviruses in general, and this coronavirus specifically that we're dealing with right now. So when you get infected, you do develop immunity against whatever is infecting you because your body learns to fight it. It's like getting the real thing to learn to fight the real thing next time. But what we've also understood is that immunity that you get does not necessarily remain permanent. It's probably going to raise other questions about whether we're going to need boosters in the future and so forth. And also what we spoke about earlier on, whether there is a slight mismatch between the immunity that you may have acquired with that infection and a new variant that may be circulating, even if you still have some degree of protection. So what we know, people would probably remember also other people who may have gotten coronavirus in March or April last year and maybe got another mild disease later in this year, earlier this year, or whatever it is. So what we now know is that if you have had a previous infection, you may have some degree of protection, but getting another dose of the vaccine almost boosts your immunity to a much better state of preparedness with coming across the virus again. That is why the recommendation all over the world is that even those who may have gotten a coronavirus infection before, COVID-19 before, you're advised to actually get that dose because you will still benefit from it. It's one of the reasons why people are not being asked when they, before being given a shot, whether they had that, and they're not being excluded on the basis of having had coronavirus earlier on. But one of the reasons is that we don't even know at the moment, and this is probably a question that you may be going to ask later, whether this immunity will last for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years, or whether there will be a need to top up that immunity. And that vaccine certainly does on the basis of that. We have had people who have had coronavirus before, and when they were checked for immunoglobulins 3 months, 6 months down the line, people could not find their immunoglobulins later. And part of that thinking behind that is because we're vaccinating everyone, let's vaccinate everyone because we know it will still protect them. And if they've had some baseline protection, that baseline protection will be boosted by the presence of and receiving a vaccine.
It's interesting to note that that we're probably moving towards a situation soon, and Germany has demonstrated the value of mixing vaccines. Where one vaccine your body actually produces a stronger response if it's then mixed with another type. So you get a CoronaVac and then you get Pfizer, and it's the same effect. I mean, basically you could think of that first infection as the first form of immunity, the first form of vaccine. Now you need to boost it. What's clear is that nothing on its own, having an infection on its own, or having just one jab of Pfizer, all of these produce a certain response, but it doesn't get us over the line. And so by combining it, we're getting a far stronger immune response, making us as a nation stronger, and hopefully moving us towards herd immunity.
So a practical question I know some people ask is, okay, so I get myself registered to be vaccinated. Do I get a choice as to whether I get Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson? Is Pfizer, because it's 2 jabs, more efficient than, or effective or more powerful than Johnson & Johnson with 1? And is it free?
Let's start with is it free? So every single person in South Africa who's over the age of 18, based on the age groups, is entitled to get the vaccine free at the point of contact. So nobody can take a cent from you when you come in to Dis-Chem or when you come into a public hospital to be vaccinated. And there are some sharks going around who are injecting water into people's arms and charging them for that. That is wrong. Nobody must pay a cent. Now, if you're on medical aid, the medical aid will reimburse government for the cost of that vaccine. That mechanism has now been put in place. I'm very relieved to say that as of Friday night, literally 2 nights ago, people who don't have medical aid can also go to a private facility. So can also go to a vaccination site run by a Dis-Chem or a Clicks and get vaccinated, and the state will reimburse Clicks or Dis-Chem for doing that. So it is free, and it's open to anybody. The important thing here is to vaccinate as many people as we can, as quickly as we can. And for you as an individual, whether you get J&J or whether you get 2 doses of Pfizer, the risk of hospitalization is so much reduced in both cases. Whether it doesn't matter what vaccine you're getting, that that your chance of hospitalization is significantly reduced right across the board. So given this fact, and given the fact that we got to get to everybody as quickly as possible, we can't have confusing situations where healthcare workers are having to remember whether it's a J&J or whether it's a Pfizer, and we know that people get confused about whether they need to come back a second time or not. So we've got to keep things as simple and as clean as possible. And to do that, we need to roll the vaccines out as fast as possible, ensuring that we only have one vaccine type per site, roll that out as quickly as possible, with the knowledge that even though there might be slight differences in the transmission risk, we will have still hugely reduced the risk of disease or death, regardless of the vaccine that you receive.
The best vaccine is the one that you've got access to. And so the advice is, when your group, when the name of your group comes up and you are in that list because you belong to that group, whether you're a healthcare worker under a certain program, or whether you are now 50 to 59-year-old under a certain program, or you're a teacher under a different program, that is a vaccine that you've got access to because it belongs to that program, for ease and simplicity of organizing this rapidly scaled up vaccination program. And the best vaccine that you can get is the one that you have access to. And the sooner you get that, the better, because you're going to get protection as soon as your immunity kicks in, than delaying, for example, holding out for another vaccine that will probably still come, and we may even get more doses of different vaccines, but you get protected as soon as you have that vaccine coming in. And so for me, it's simple. The best vaccine you can get is the one that you've got access to.
Thank you. Just a couple more questions. We're running out of time soon, but was interested to hear from you about, I think it's been called long COVID. So how common and how likely is that, because for many people, they recover quite quickly, but there's some people, it doesn't seem to go away. And what's that about, and how likely or common is that?
Well, I'm not really an expert in long COVID, and one of the shortcomings is that I'm a pediatrician, and we haven't seen such a large burden of COVID as you experience it in adults, in children. We have had something called multiple inflammatory systems, what do you call it, MISC, multiple inflammatory syndrome in childhood. And what happens is that these children may have some kind of immune response to coronavirus infection, and it may present a number of weeks down the line. And but in adults, there have been reports of people having a long-standing chronic cause of illness following coronavirus infection, and part of it is not very well understood. I think the reason is that we now know that even those that died, the major cause underlying the death is the body's own response to having been infected with such a high load of virus and not being able to combat it. And so what may be happening is prolonged altered immune responses that are actually causing problem in the long term, which is basically what's causing that presentation. But again, coming back to our main theme here, is a real reason why vaccination makes such a big difference, because the more severe someone's COVID has been, the more likely they are to have that long COVID, as they call it. And so it's become quite critical to intervene, because it's not just about severe disease in the acute phase, which is what we usually talk about, but it's also severe disabling disease that is a result of that chronic illness going forward as a result of having suffered from severe acute COVID. So I'm not sure what the statistics show in adults as to how common, and maybe, I don't know if David has that, but for me, however you look at it, the way of dealing with that is exactly what we have before us now.
So I think just the final point which you touched on earlier, Rudzani, was around, you know, the long-term protection that vaccination provides, and you know, do we have any data on that? And you know, would a cocktail help? You know, if you have a bit of Pfizer and a bit of or you know, regular boosters, should we be looking at sort of 12 months, 18 months? What's your advice on that?
So, as I mentioned earlier on, we're not sure how long the vaccines will last. Think about it right now. We do have some data from the trials that took place much earlier on when COVID was discovered, and immunity has not remained static. It does start reduce as far as antibodies are concerned. We are not really sure that measuring antibodies is the best way of assessing that immunity, because not only do you produce antibodies, but there are cells that can kill and clear the virus once you are infected. And that is not as easy to measure as just measuring the level of antibodies. And you probably retain a bit of that, which may mean that long term, you may still, even if you get infected, still keep the ability to clear that virus pretty quickly. But because we have not had enough length of time passed since these vaccines have been in use, we are really not sure how long the protection will last for. To make things worse is whether there's changes in variants that may continue appearing going into the future. It will make any difference with how well we are protected against those new emerging variants. Like happens with flu. I mean, are we going to end up with that situation where, you know, you almost need a jab every year because the following year the flu is slightly changed from what your vaccine was protecting you against, even if there's a bit of overlap between those two variants that you may be having. But I think in the long run, our redemption, so to say, as far as this virus is concerned, maybe what David was talking about, this issue of the elusive herd immunity, if we can vaccinate enough people, when you reach a situation where most people are protected, the virus has got no other people to infect. And that serves two things. One, it means the disease cannot spread, but it cannot mutate because it needs to be infecting other people and multiplying to actually gain that change and mutation that gives its new variants. It's one of those reasons that some of us who are also probably social activists have been warning rich countries that them having all these vaccines that they could hold for themselves and not giving access to poor countries to those vaccines threatens them too, because as long as other people are still harboring the virus and they're not getting the herd immunity in different geographical locations, they harbor the ability to produce these variants that may even threaten those rich countries as long as there's still interaction amongst people in the world, which is still going to happen. So the thing we should be aiming for is covering everyone in the world. So even if the immunity wanes, if we can get herd immunity, you eventually get on top of the disease because it will peter away because there is no new host for the virus, because everyone at that stage, when their immunity is high, is not susceptible to the virus.
So Russell, I mean, as we're wrapping up, I mean, I think it's useful for us just to take a step back again and a step back in history and just reflect on the fact that we've made significant gains, medical gains, over the course of the last 100 years. And we're not, we're not simply at risk of epidemics in the way that our forefathers have been. Remember that the epidemics come and go. They've been with us since the beginning of time. What has been able to happen in the last 100 years is that we've been able to curtail those epidemics. We don't have to have hundreds of children dying of diphtheria or thousands and thousands of people dying of smallpox. Vaccination has been one of the most successful health interventions ever. In South Africa, we've seen it. Even with lots of children getting diarrhea as a consequence of living in appalling informal settlements, the introduction of the rotavirus vaccine in South Africa significantly reduced the number of deaths here. And so we find ourselves in the situation where we can actually capitalize on the experience of science, and we can actually capitalize on the knowledge that wasn't there before. And it's simply, it's like polio, and it's like the rotavirus. It's a new virus, and we actually have the tools at our disposal. And it would not make sense for us to ignore those. It does make sense for us to use them for the benefit of our own families and the benefit of our society.
Thank you, David. So that almost seems like a very apt closing word. I'd just like to give both of you the opportunity, if there's anything else you'd like to say to our audience before we wrap this up, but also just to thank you for your time and your expertise and your incredible effort on behalf of all of us for tackling this horrific virus that's caused so much damage all over the world. Rodani, any closing words?
Yeah, well, Russell, when we're talking about these vaccines and issues about whether they work and safety concerns and stuff like that, and you can hear from what I've said that I advocate the use of these vaccines, but I'm not advocating them for other people. I have used the vaccine myself. I've received the Johnson & Johnson, and my parents, I told them from the outset that when it becomes available, they should get the vaccines. I think my dad was in the queue the first day that the Pfizer vaccine was offered. So this is not about like saying this, please take this, but it's for you. It's because I'm not sending other people to an experiment, but I'm sending people to an intervention that I myself and those who are very close to me have been, I've encouraged them to take it, and they have done so. So I just want to make it clear.
Thank you, Rodani. David.
And from my side, just to reiterate that that registration for vaccinations is now open to everybody over the age of 50. And just once again, you don't have to be a South African citizen. If you are living in South Africa and you're over the age of 50, you can register. And you can register in different ways. You can register online or through USSD or through WhatsApp, or feel free to call the helpline 0800 029 999, and they will assist you with registration. If you've waited for 2 weeks after registering and you still haven't received an SMS, then you're entitled to walk in to the closest vaccination site and ask to be registered. I ask you to be proactive. Don't sit back waiting for an SMS if it hasn't come after a month. We all have to be active in ensuring our protection and ensuring those of the people that we love. Thank you.
Thank you, David and Rodani. And I hope that those words have been well heard by everybody, and certainly would actively encourage everyone at RUC to take that advice and to be registered as soon as you can, not only for your own sake, but for the sake of those you love. So thank you and good night.